6 months after Dry Hollow burned, Thomas Grady still smelled smoke when it rained. Not just the vague memory of fire, but the sharp stinging scent of pine resin boiling, of meat cooking beneath bark, of something old exhaling through cracks in the earth. They told him it was PTSD. The doctors said trauma could rewire the senses. Smell ghosts, hear echoes. They gave him pills, therapy appointments, and pamphlets on how the brain copes with tragedy. But obviously, none of it explained why his shadow flickered, even under fluorescent lights, or why frost formed on his mirror when he breathed, even in the middle of summer. Thomas had been living in a temporary trailer near the edge of a small Oregon town, under government supervision. Technically, he was still part of the Park Service. Technically, they hadn't fired him. But unofficially, he was under observation, monitored, studied. His days were quiet. His nights were not. Every evening he watched the trees across the road. They didn't move. Not in the normal way. They leaned. They waited. Some nights he heard whispering from the branches, like hot wind curling around a throat made of wood. The nightmares were worse. They started small, embers in the shapes of eyes, smoke curling into screaming mouths. But then came the forest again, the fire again. Only it wasn't just burning, it was alive. It pulsed, it breathed, and in the center of it all stood the tall things, charred and twitching, mouths open and inhaling the flames. They never moved in the dreams. They just watched, waiting for something, waiting for him. After the 5th night in a row of waking up screaming, Thomas unplugged his landline. The government check still came in every month, and the Park Service liaison, a stiff man named Daniels, stopped by weekly to make sure he hadn't gone feral. But something was changing. Daniels had begun bringing others with him, quiet people in suits who didn't smile. They asked strange questions, asked if Thomas had ever heard the phrase resonant ignition, if he remembered anything unusual about the geometry of the fire, if the names Numael or Virith meant anything to him. He lied. Of course he remembered. But if they were asking, it meant someone else knew. That meant the fire wasn't over. Everything changed the night the power went out. It wasn't stormy, no wind, no rain, just silence. And then the lights flickered and went dark. Thomas sat in the trailer, flashlight in hand, pulse racing. Then came the smell. Not just smoke, but them. That impossible, bitter scent burned stone, rot and something like cinnamon left too long in the sun. He stood slowly and opened the door. The trees across the road were closer. They had moved. He was sure of it. One tree near the ditch was split down the middle, glowing faintly with inner embers. In the dark, between the trunks, something moved. A figure, too tall, too still. Its mouth opened, and even from across the road, Thomas could feel the heat. It didn't speak, but a shape formed in his head, like a thought too large to fit in words. He slammed the door and didn't sleep. By morning, the power was back on. Daniels came early, knocking without his usual rhythm. He looked pale, sweating. "There's been an event," Daniels said. "Another flare-up." "Where?" Thomas asked, but he already knew. "Dry Hollow. We think it started beneath the soil. No lightning, no campers, just spontaneous ignition." He looked away. We Need you to come with us." Thomas laughed, a short, broken sound. "You think I want to go back there?" Daniels didn't blink. "We don't think you want to. We think you don't have a choice." That afternoon, they flew in a black chopper, no markings, over the old burn zone. But what Thomas saw below wasn't just scorched earth. It was changing. The patterns of the burn made no sense. Spirals, concentric rings, lines forming symbols the size of football fields. From above, it looked like the forest was drawing, writing something. The government had set up a temporary base near the old ranger station, now just blackened timber. Men in hazmat suits carried strange gear, devices that pulsed and hummed, clicking like Geiger counters tuned to static. They called it an anomaly event. Said the soil was testing positive for interference, but no one would say from what. That night, Thomas sat in a field tent, staring at the tree line. The woods hadn't grown back, but something had taken root. Thin black vines spiraled up old trunks, their tips glowing red like lit fuses. A humming, low and constant, vibrated in his bones. Then something howled. Not an animal, not wind, something hungry. The next day, they sent a team in. 3 men, 1 woman, armed, equipped with breathing gear, cameras, radios. Thomas watched them disappear into the trees. They never came back. All that returned was a single boot, placed neatly in the center of the path, just like last time. Thomas knew what had to be done. He geared up. Mask, axe, flare gun, flashlight, and he walked into the woods alone. At first, the forest was quiet. Then the whispering started. Not words, just suggestions. Shapes forming at the edge of his thought. Branches snapped behind him. He didn't turn around. He reached the gorge where he'd first seen them. It was deeper now, wider, as if the ground had pulled away to avoid touching whatever was rising beneath. Smoke seeped out from cracks. The air stung. Frost rimmed the edges of burned stones. Then he heard his name, not in a voice, but in the wind.
Thomas.
He turned. They stood on the ridge above him. 5 tall figures, blackened and skeletal, eyes burning like coals. One stepped forward and opened his mouth. No words, just light. Fire spiraled from his throat like reversed smoke, illuminating glyphs in the trees. And Thomas understood. The fire wasn't destruction. It was purification. They were preparing the world for something else. The things beneath the forest, they weren't born in flame. They were buried in it. The fire was their cradle. And now they were waking up. He ran. He didn't remember how far. Hours passed, maybe days. But when he emerged, covered in ash, bleeding from the nose, the forest behind him was singing. He collapsed at the base. Daniels wasn't there. No one was. The camp was abandoned, but something had followed him. Now, back in town, Thomas waits. He watches the tree line. The whispers come more often. Sometimes the TV flickers and shows flames instead of channels. Sometimes he wakes up with ash on his tongue. The fire isn't behind him anymore. It's in the wiring, in the veins. And every time he breathes, smoke curls from his mouth. Just a little. He doesn't know how long he has, but he knows the forest is spreading.